Funding for current conversations is provided by the University of Oklahoma President's Office, OU Outreach, and World Literature Today. Welcome to Current Conversations. I'm R.C. Davis-Indiano. Today we're going to be talking to a living legend in Oklahoma broadcast journalism, Mr. Dick Pryor. He's been an innovative force in radio and public and commercial television and public relations for over 40 years. He is the new station manager of KGOU at the University of Oklahoma. Join us for a fascinating discussion about radio, past and future. Dick Pryor, welcome to Current Conversations. It is great to have you here.
Thank you, RC. It's great to be with you and at the University of Oklahoma once again.
Well, we're proud to have you here. And it occurs to me, I want to go back in your career just a little bit because you've done just about everything broadcast-wise in Oklahoma. But you started out, didn't you, at KGOU at the University of Oklahoma?
I did, as a student in sports. So I did sports broadcasting at KGOU as a freshman.
What year would this have been?
1974.
Okay.
1974. And went forward in my broadcasting career doing sports, first at KGOU, later KNOR Radio, also in Norman, and other places as well. And so I spent the first 15 years of my career doing sports on radio and television.
Now, I've got to think that radio was probably different back in those days, if you're actually doing it in ways that I probably couldn't even guess. What occurs to you? What was it like to do radio back then?
Well, it was different. We actually spliced the tape. Spliced the tape with a razor blade, and then you would tape it back whenever you were editing tape. So that was very different. Radio was just always a lot of fun because you can do it on the fly. It's theater of the mind. And so I enjoyed the communication aspect of radio. It's one of the things that appealed to me about it. And eventually play-by-play, which I did also, of sporting events, is you create a picture in the listener's mind with your words and your inflection, and it really teaches you how to communicate, even more than in television. And then it's a natural progression, I think, to go from radio to television, adding in pictures.
You know, you touch on something I was actually thinking about before we met today. And I was asking myself, what draws me to radio so much? And it's really what you said. It's almost akin to reading in the sense that it happens in your head. And I can't think of any other medium that works quite that way, except reading.
Right,
really. It's very, very close to that.
It is very close. And in my career, beginning at KGOU, I did sports. I was a disc jockey. But regardless of what you do, you are creating a picture. You're telling a story for people, even if it has music attached to it.
So what do you think drew you to broadcast journalism? Was it instant love for it, or did you just kind of feel at home there? What was it?
It just happened. As a freshman, I started out as an accounting major. That was my plan. But I found out, along with some other friends, that there was a radio station at the university that would allow students to go on the air. That sounded pretty interesting. So we showed up one day and watched a high school football scoreboard show being done. And the two hosts of the show said, "Do you think you can do that next week?" And we said, "Yeah, sure." Had no idea whether we could do that or not. But that's how it all started, because it was an inviting place. And the good part of it was students could work at KGOU in those days, and we could make mistakes, we could learn. And a lot of people came out of the University of Oklahoma, and whether they were in broadcasting or other fields, because of their experience there.
I've got to think that what you just said is a big part of radio. There's a sort of turning room there. TV is so expensive. There's so much money on the line as far as production costs and sponsors and so on and so forth. In radio, it just feels like there's room to innovate a little more. Isn't that always been part of it?
Oh, I think that's true, and I think you should innovate. I think radio gives you the opportunity to do that because the reality is you're going to be doing it again in another hour or another day or another week. Right. And so you try something, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work, but I think it's important to try to innovate as much as possible. And radio does give you the opportunity to do that, and your failures are not as costly.
I think listeners feel that too, and it's a welcome feeling that there's some participation with the audience, and you're taking chances. I think they like that feel.
Yeah, we don't want to fail, but
No.
but it's good to try some new approaches, because how else do you really grow
Right.
and find those new things that are going to be appealing to people if you don't try it?
Now, I'm still tracking your career in broadcast journalism in Oklahoma. Where did the law school piece come in for you?
Actually, law school came later, because I was in radio doing sports, television doing sports, first in Wichita Falls, Texas, and then in Tulsa, and then in Oklahoma City. But in 1990, I decided to go to law school because I wanted to have something else that I could do besides broadcasting. I stayed in broadcasting, actually for 25 years at OETA, doing news then. But I went to law school after I had been actually out in the broadcasting field for about 15 years.
Law school, I'm kind of biased. I always think it's a great option for people. I think I should be a lawyer in another career.
think?
Yeah, well, I mean, you have this understanding of the way things work
Yes.
in the real world,
Yes.
and that really helps a lot.
Absolutely. I would tell anybody, and this is not meant to disparage any particular field, but I think journalism and law are two of the best educations to get, because they teach you writing skills, thinking skills, critical thinking skills,
Right.
speaking skills.
Right.
And law school made a world of difference for me. I was a better journalist
Yeah.
because of going to law school.
I
was
can
a
see
better
that.
I was a better law student and lawyer because I was a journalist.
Yeah,
They
lawyers
work
don't take
together.
things for granted. They assume you've got to provide some evidence for what you're saying, just that clarity of mind.
Right.
The TV piece, was it just natural if you were in radio to at some point try TV? Is that the way that worked? Or?
I think so. That's the way I felt about it. It just seemed like the next logical step would be to be on television. I interned when I was at OU as an undergrad. I interned at Channel 4 in Oklahoma City under Big Bob Berry.
Oh yeah, the legend.
Yes, Robbie Robertson and Ron Thulin, they were there as well. So I interned with them, and I grew to really enjoy television and the added dimension in storytelling, factoring in pictures.
Yeah.
And how you can then create a different kind of experience that way.
I've seen you many times on TV, and I've loved watching you on TV. And
Thanks.
I don't dislike TV, but in the way we're talking now, I don't think it has the power to engage people in that kind of really wonderful way where they're participating the way radio does, you know?
There's something magical about radio. Now, don't get me wrong, I love television.
Yeah.
And have done that for most of my career. But there's something magical about radio because of the way you communicate and how you receive the message. Think of all those times when you're driving,
Right.
Those driveway moments when great storytelling brings you in and you can't wait to hear the end of the story.
Absolutely.
That doesn't happen quite so much in television unless you have extremely compelling pictures.
Yeah, I think probably very seldom do I have kitchen moments where I can't turn the TV off, and many, many driveway moments where I just sat there and I wanted to hear the whole thing. Now, were you all an NPR station when you started at KGOU?
No, it wasn't, actually. That came later. We were album-oriented rock, which was a little scary, a little risky at times.
Yeah.
In addition to having students on the air. There were a lot of students, though, in management positions. I was actually sports director when I was a junior.
Okay.
And had a staff of 34 students in the sports department.
Wow.
So that tells you how many people were actually involved in radio. So it was not an NPR station, but I'm glad it is now because NPR has such a great brand and is so needed today.
You know, I think the whole issue of radio, it's just really complicated. I wish we had a couple of hours to talk about it, but it seems that NPR is in many ways still the 800-pound thing in the room. It's been around for, 46 years now, since 1970. Can you give me your thoughts about the development of NPR? Are you proud of what it's done? Do you think it went the right way? Did it miss opportunities? What are your just kind of reflections on NPR?
I'm very proud of NPR. I'm an NPR listener and have been for many, many years.
Yeah.
Because I think the reporting is well done. Well done. There are high standards. It is real reporting, real storytelling, fact-based storytelling, enterprise reporting, interpretive reporting. And some people might wonder whether we should be in interpretive reporting, but that's where the critical thinking comes in. is trying to determine how to tell the story in a way that communicates with people and makes an impact in their lives. And I think NPR does that better than probably any other organization, and they have for a long time. The way they have evolved, NPR has evolved, I think has indicated that this is the model for how we should tell stories.
Well, and I was thinking too, it's an interesting model because I think compared to the rest of the world, where very often radio is a government function, NPR does programming and they do some subsidizing of stations, but we really went a different way here with commercial radio, and then NPR stations very often are supported by universities or some kind of nonprofit thing. So, I mean, this is a very particular model for doing radio that I don't think is really replicated anywhere else.
Well, public television and public radio have a good model, and that is it's partly funded by the government, to be sure, through the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Yeah, but they don't own any stations.
But they don't own the stations.
Right.
The stations are owned by university licensees, community licensees, or state licensees.
Yeah.
And we survive through contributions, through memberships, through underwriting. And that's really a people-oriented approach. I think sometimes people might forget that about public media, that we are actually supported by the people.
Right. Well, and there was so much fear. People, talk about this all the time. When TV came along, people said, okay, radio's over. It'll never survive. Yeah. And that idea that one medium supplants the other hasn't really been the case. Radio maybe died back for a while and came back and seems to be maybe making a resurgence right now. Weren't you saying something to me before the show today about more people listening to NPR?
The listenership has been going up for NPR. Millennials increasingly are listening to NPR for their news, which is interesting.
It really is. Yeah.
I think that says a lot about the value, the quality of the work, but it also talks about, as far as the continued impact of radio, talks about the fact that that you can consume it in many different ways.
Yeah.
You can consume it on a computer, on an app. You can consume it in the car. Radio has continued to evolve even past the time when people thought radio would die. And consumers now do want their news coverage, they want their entertainment in the way they want it, where they are, when they want it.
Right. It seems to me that I've seen in results of polls several times that NPR News is the most trusted source of news in America. And given this culture where people are skeptical of just about everything, that is really kind of an accomplishment. I wonder how have they done that, do you think?
I think it's about being vigilant. I think it's about being ethical. I think NPR and PBS, also very, very trusted for news and public affairs, have dedicated their operations to integrity. Yeah. And you don't get that from everybody. And I think one of the great things about public media is that we can really walk the walk when it comes to integrity, because it's not completely driven by commercials and the demands of the economy as much as commercial broadcasting.
Well, and there are background shows that you hear on NPR that I know would never be on TV. There would never be enough time, and there just wouldn't be an audience for it. I listened to a whole hour recently about the targeting for drones around the world, and it took an hour just to explain the way it worked. TV would never have the patience for that.
For years, working for a PBS affiliate, our philosophy was, if PBS doesn't do it, who will? I think the same thing holds for NPR.
Right.
We will tell stories, and that's why we're there. There are stories that are well suited for commercial broadcasters, radio, primarily television. And they're the kinds of stories that they do very, very well, but they can't do everything.
Right.
And that opens up the field for public media to fill in with that kind of in-depth programming that you can't get in other places.
In fact, I've noticed, because I'm such a watcher of the news in relation to elections and so on and so forth, CNN sort of makes things up. I don't mean makes things up, but they're really scraping the barrel to fill that time, whereas NPR is going to give you background research that may take a half an hour, an hour. Your time is really going to be worth it to sit there and listen. And very often at CNN, I'm thinking, no, I don't need to hear you rehash this again. I mean, just very different experience.
Well, I think that's also true for the other 24/7 news channels. The resources are not there to continually come up with new information. So they churn the same information, repackage it from
Spin it.
hour to hour. You
Right.
see the same thing this morning and later in the day
Right.
because they only have a limited number of resources. In radio, because it is generally less expensive than television,
Right.
you can create fresher content. And I think that's one of the draws of NPR, is that people know they can tune in all day long and hear something new.
Right. I want to take you back to something you said just a moment ago. I think the way people have been understanding the audience for radio for the last maybe 5 or 10 years is that there's a graying audience, like me, very dedicated to radio and what NPR offers. And then the holy grail seems to be the young people. How do we bring the young people on board? And there's programming on NPR that absolutely seems aimed at young people. Invisibilia, Radio Lab, This American Life, Snap Judgment. They're just wonderful shows. But the conventional wisdom has been they're not finding a young audience. So that kind of setup with a graying audience on the one hand, programming aimed at young people, but not quite hooking them, bringing them in on the other seemed to be the predicament. It sounds like you're suggesting that that impasse in some way is being broken now with millennials.
I think it is. I think it is. It takes time. It takes time. People have to find the programs. But because there are different delivery systems, podcasts, apps,
Right.
we have an opportunity in radio to push out a lot of content fairly inexpensively, because video may not be involved, and reach those listeners, those users, more frequently, touching them more often. And the more you touch them, the more they're likely to see the value and become more loyal.
You know, I think one thing that we're just kind of glossing over, but I think an audience is going to pick up, we're really redefining radio a little bit. You know, for a lot of traditional radio listeners, there's a radio set and you turn it on and you hear the signal that came from a tower. That's what we're calling terrestrial radio now, right?
Right.
But in fact, that's just one way of delivery. What are the others? On the internet,
Right.
podcasting, I can't think of anything else.
Well, through your iPhones.
through your smartphone.
Your smartphone.
Yeah.
People are using that more and more. And I will say this, I think media is what we're becoming. Just like several years ago at the PBS convention, I heard Jim Collins, the author of Good to Great, say to these television broadcasters, you need to stop saying you're television, you're video. Well, I think now we're media.
Right.
So radio
It's a good way
is
to think about
media.
it.
Television is media. Television needs written words on their website. So do we in radio. In radio, we need some video, and we can do it now through a smartphone fairly inexpensively, and in this kind of a program that is much more highly produced. So I think we have to be ready to provide the content that people want in a way they prefer it, because how we're going to get our numbers up and our loyalty up and hopefully our financial support is to provide the content that people want, that they can trust, and provide it to them in a way they can receive it, however they desire.
I'm thinking that maybe the commonality among what we're calling different delivery systems for radio would be the emphasis on the spoken word. You know, and we were talking about this a little bit before the show. It's something pretty akin to reading, just because you participate and you see the pictures in your head. Somebody else doesn't create them for you. It seems to be a tradition of alternative programming. You're not going to hear mainstream. It's going to be the background, the story that's not told somewhere else. And the portability, that radio goes with you, particularly in the car or with your smartphone or whatever. That seems to be common in all those delivery systems. Would that be right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think the portability is critical. The fact that you can take it with you makes a big, big difference.
Yeah.
And I think we've touched upon it, but I think the idea that in radio you can be a little more creative, you can take some risks, you can reach out to niche audiences a little bit more.
Right.
And that's okay, because especially in public radio, public media, we don't necessarily have to program for the mass audience. We can provide content that is more targeted, focused, and you aggregate those numbers and you have big numbers, but you're serving different segments, a more diverse segment of the audience with different kinds of programming.
I wonder if there's a possibility that stations like KGOU might separate a little bit from NPR in the future. I keep hearing about the importance of local connection, and instead of just sort of the network participation, serving that community. Any thoughts about that?
I think where we're headed is to become more national. Now, having said that, what I really mean is local. That sounds like a paradox.
It does.
But by saying more national, I think NPR has realized that it is more important now, maybe more than ever before, for them to reach out beyond the Beltway, beyond the traditional coastal media centers, and reach out to different parts of the country and hear voices that they've never heard before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where we're going. So I hope that in the next few years, that especially in public radio, public media, we will be providing more locally produced content that appeals to a broader audience, and hopefully that audience sees the value.
So the idea of just the single perspective that comes from the East Coast or from Culver City, California, whatever, that could still be there, but some kind of participation so that that station has a unique identity that comes out of the community that's actually in?
Local is very important. People want to hear local stories that impact their lives, but they also want to hear national stories. I just think it's going to be important for NPR to reach out to stations around the country, hear some voices that traditionally aren't heard, and have it come from the grassroots a little bit more. This last election cycle taught people in journalism some lessons. You have to listen to more than the usual people to find out what's truly going on.
Where everybody missed the boat.
Everybody missed the boat that way. The polling was not off that much, but we weren't listening to the voices that we needed to hear to get a true perspective on what was going on in the country. And I think that's the challenge for all of us in journalism.
Is there any way that you see that maybe public radio actually might partner with commercial radio a little bit? Is that on the horizon? Hybrids?
I think anymore, we have to be open to partnerships of all kinds.
Okay.
Whether it's in commercial broadcasting, whether it's in print media, whether it's in online news publications. I've always been a supporter of being open to partnerships where you can increase your capacity. You can provide more coverage, probably for less money, through partnerships. Right. And there's cross-promotion involved, there's branding involved, where I think you create a stronger dynamic when you are willing to look at new opportunities. And I think viability is critical.
Right. We're looking at a lot of wonderful opportunities that are on the horizon. Probably nobody knows exactly how broadcast journalism is going to go and how radio is going to go. But one of the offshoots of all of this is fake news, and the traditional gatekeepers seem to be gone. So very often there's news that's not even fake, but maybe it's not quite ready for prime time. It may not be totally reliable. Do you worry about that kind of as a underbelly of all of this?
Every day.
Yeah.
I worry about that every day because we've seen how pervasive it is and how attractive it is for people to see something, especially in social media, and believe it.
And retweet it.
And retweet it without even thinking. I would encourage people when they see something that seems very salacious to do a little checking.
Right.
To find out whether that's really true.
Yeah.
Before they retweet or repost or send it around the world through an email.
It is complicated because the traditional gatekeepers, the producers, the editors that decided what was the news, they're gone. So, it's kind of a lasting frontier out there now with things, But the bad side could be that we sometimes don't know what the news is.
I think it's important for legacy news organizations to communicate better to the people why we're important, how we do what we do, and why they should pay attention to what we're doing and how we're sourcing and doing our work more than those other sites.
It seems like in other words, there's still a need for professionalism in the delivery of the news. We just don't know what form, where the gatekeepers are going to be, exactly who they're going to be. But there's still a need for them, I think, is what you're saying, right?
Absolutely. And even young people that may not say that they watch traditional media, they might get a news story off of social media, but what we're finding is happening is they will be interested in a story by something they saw through social media, and then they will go to a traditional media site to determine whether it's true.
Well, I like that. I like hearing that.
I like that a lot.
Yeah, right. Okay, I'm going to put you on the spot a little bit. I want you to try to look into the future, 10 or 20 years down the road, however far you can see into the future, and tell us something that you think will happen that will have an impact on radio, either good or bad, or any part of what we're calling radio.
I think looking into the future for broadcasting in general, whether it's radio or television, at some point, terrestrial broadcast will be less important. And I think people will be carrying around their news sources in their pocket, just like we increasingly are doing now. And we won't even think about it being something for young people. Traditionally, in the last 20 years, we've seen definition of who you are as a consumer based on the size of your screen. Older people tend to have bigger screen TVs. You get smaller, the age goes down. I think everybody will be a more active news consumer, and I think that's exciting. We need people to be engaged. We need civic involvement, and we need people to take advantage of that great, powerful source that's in their pocket. So I hope in the future that while terrestrial broadcast, radio and television will still be around, that people will consume more because there'll be more options.
Do you think people are still going to appreciate that kind of niche value of radio, say over television, over streaming, et cetera, that is such a draw? You were describing it earlier. We talked about it as like reading. You think that's still going to be there, the special draw of the spoken word?
Oh, I hope so. I hope so. In your work, in my work for my career, I've seen the power of the spoken word and how you string words together and create a mood. I think that's always our challenge, is to find new ways to communicate with people and inspire people by the words we write and how we say them.
That's a good place to stop. Dick Pryor, thank you so much. I think we need to have you back and talk about radio and television more.
That sounds great, RC. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. I'm so glad that you could be with us today. Tune in next week for more Current Conversations.